Okay, excellent. Welcome, everybody. This is the VanTech meeting, and this is one of our themed meetings. We've been holding these monthly meetings since April 1999, so we've been around for a while, and we're really glad to see familiar faces and some new faces. And this month, we are featuring Agri-Foodtech investments. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Frank Lefflar, who will host this sessions. Then we will meet some great companies and great people in the Agri-Foodtech business. So Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Telus, and welcome everyone. This is the first time actually that we host this event across Western Canada. Although it is our fifth time that we do this, we really wanted to help create a more connected and collaborative community across Western Canada. My name is Frank Lefflar. I'm the Marketing and Partnership Lead at VanTech, and I'm also an EIR at Foresight and a member of the Foresight AgriNext team. VanTech is an angel network of independent angel investors and funds. We've been active since 1999 and get together on the first Wednesday of every month. We'll see pitches from investor-vetted companies, meet with founders, and support them on their journey. Today, I'm your host for the first hour of this meeting with a presentation and panel discussions, and my colleague Telus will lead the second part that starts at 4 o'clock, the investor meeting. We have a full agenda, so I'm going to keep it short to leave more time for presenters and panels. Wendy, could you please launch our first poll? Before we kick things off, I want to thank the people that have been great to help organize this event: Angela Bravo, manager of AgriNext program at Foresight, and James Freeman, tech entrepreneur and fellow angel investor with a passion for Agtech, based in Edmonton, Alberta. We are grateful for the support from the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, the Government of Alberta, the Government of Canada, and our event partners, Foresight, AgriNext, Impact United, and Raymond James. And that brings us to our first presenter, Steve Hansen. Steve is an analyst at Raymond James. He's also been very helpful to a number of companies that presented at VanTech, and he has a really good grasp of what is going on in agri-food tech investment in Canada and the world. He graciously agreed to share his knowledge and insights on investment trends in Canada and the world. So let me pass the screen over to Steve.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Okay, thanks for the time, everybody. Look, so my name is Steve Hansen, equity analyst with Raymond James. As Frank suggested, I cover the broader agriculture and ag tech landscapes for the firm. My day job is really focused on predominantly covering public equities, so large names like a Nutrien or an Ag Growth you might be familiar with. But I've also been spending an increasing amount of my time over the past 5 years with smaller private ag tech companies that are in that growth mode. And it's been a lot of fun, frankly. I've got 10 minutes here this morning, so I'm going to go fairly quickly through a few different slides, really just with the goal of giving you a sense for some of the broader investment trends we're seeing out there in the landscape, as well as some of the strategic activity that's been quite influential in providing exits and liquidity for different companies. So we'll get into that here as we go. Starting at 30,000 feet, this is really just a chart that helps illustrate that private capital has been flooding into the sector now for effectively a decade. You can see here we've got a 45% compound annual growth rate. That included 2020, I would note, despite the onset of the pandemic. And while the data is still rolling in here through this year, I would just note we're on track for another record year. So all things considered, continue to see strong inflows. Now, as the chart suggests, I do like to point this out, that this is quite a broad encompassing data set that includes probably one of the more liberal definitions of agri-food tech in general. It includes both upstream ag tech, which would be more traditional on-farm growing related activities, as well as the downstream side, which is more into right down into the e-grocery restaurant space. Now, I just like to start here though, because I think it provides probably perhaps the broadest lens of the sector. However, most of my comments here going forward now will be focused predominantly on that upstream vertical, which I think most people associate more closely with ag tech. A couple of key points to note here. First, deal flow was very brisk last year, again, despite the pandemic, roughly 150 deals per category across the landscape. Second, the bulk of deals are still relatively small. Again, median deal size, roughly $2 million in 2020. So again, quite small across roughly 2,200 transactions. That said, we are noticing very clearly that we're starting to see a number of large, almost brute force type bets coming into the sector that are really starting to skew some of the deal sizes, or the median deal sizes, up quite a bit. You can see them here in some respects. And this includes a number of deals that would be, in the 100 to $200 to $300 million range, even in some cases. And I say brute force just because, it's really making big bets early on platform type transactions. And this is, of course, the same trend that's making unicorns increasingly common across the sector. Just to touch on a few of the key emerging themes, or the strong emerging themes we've been seeing for a number of years now, and some of the different sub-verticals. On the left is the innovative food space. This largely captures the plant-based protein and now cellular agriculture space, where we've started to see some of those really big bets emerge over the past couple of years. I've highlighted a few here just on the bottom to give you a sense for some of the recent deals in particular that we've been seeing. Aleph Farms, Good Meat, and Perfect Day. The Canadian Pension Plan, I would note, is one of the notable lead investors at Perfect Day for a sense, and you can see the size of that deal here. On the right is controlled environmental ag, indoor growing in effect. This predominantly includes, companies looking to localize indoor growing or leafy green production, in particular, microgreens in some cases, at the localized sort of close to end market, if you will. But it does also include other things being grown indoors, whether it's mushrooms or even insects now for alternative proteins. And that category has really started to see some momentum here, as you can see. And that also includes some new public exits that I'll highlight here again in a moment. Just again, carrying on the theme aspect of it all, biotech has become a really strong platform as well. I would caution you a little bit on this one, only because a lot of these platforms are very broad. So they certainly have ag-specific applications, but they also move into healthcare, life sciences, and a number of other applications as well. And that's just the nature of some of these new biotech platforms that we're seeing. Really big bite-sized transactions happening in the space. And then on the right-hand side, we've got farm robotics and automation. Now, this is still a smaller category in general. Like you see here, we're only talking $320 million last year. But I wanted to flag it because automation, labor constraints, all the different themes you probably hear about on a regular basis are becoming very common. And we have seen a number of exits and interesting transactions just in the last several months here. And so I think that's one to watch here going forward. I think you're going to continue to see strong momentum. So this slide now is getting into sort of the strategic activity across the landscape. And I apologize because it's a little bit busy, but the intention here is just to give you a sense for, really the fact that the largest bellwether firms in ag, what we call big ag, these companies have not been idle. They've been very active. In fact, they've been active acquirers of some of the best technologies out there, really to complement their own existing platforms. As the slide suggests, there's been some debate, I think, perhaps over which transaction sparked all of this this sort of trend, if you will. A lot of people like to point to the Climate Corp transaction back in 2013. It was just under $1 billion, surprised many. But I also like to point out the Granular transaction in Blue River, that was DuPont and Deere, respectively, having two large-sized platform deals that have really kicked off this activity level we've been seeing here thus far. And so would just make the point here that we do see this trend continuing, but I would caution a little bit on the big size deals. The big platform bets have largely been made. I'll show you in a moment, but the large, again, big ag companies have largely made big bets thus far. And so I think the tuck-in activity is probably going to be more common going forward. But for any emerging player, we're still talking, tens of millions of dollars for transactions. So that's still certainly a very nice exit for anyone involved. This is another way to describe the same chart that I just described to you. But what it does, it gives you a sense for who's acquiring what. And so I like to show this just because it gives you a sense for, at the different individual levels of the value chain. And we just loosely describe these as tier 1, tier 2 for equipment, and then input manufacturers. And I'll show you some retailers in a moment, but it just gives you a sense for what they've been going after. The tier 1 players like Deere, which I've already mentioned, have been quite active lately. I mentioned the Blue River transaction already as one of those platform bets. Bear Flag is a very recent transaction they've done. And would note now we're starting to see some interesting combinations in that, here's an example where you've got CNH acquiring Raven for its autonomous platform recently, a group that had already been quite active in the technology side of things. If we move one layer down in the value chain, This just gives you a sense for the retailers, the likes of Nutrien, which I mentioned earlier that I cover, as well as some of the other players. But it also includes many what I'll call the new non-traditional acquirers. So these are the new players to the space. We loosely call them big tech, big ag tech, and new strategic. And I would just flag here Telus Ag, of course, which is a local firm that's been quite active across multiple verticals, as you can see here. But I'd also highlight Farmers Edge, which is also a Canadian company that's gone public and has been acquisitive. The likes of Farmers Business Network. I've only included the one sort of pure tech transaction here because FBN has actually been quite acquisitive in a number of other areas, but on the tech side specifically, you can see what they've done here. And Indigo is becoming a very prominent player now in the carbon space, if you've been following any of those developments. This is a slide I like to show just because it really demonstrates that it's not just big ag or big tech acquiring small guy. You're seeing a lot of transactions across the landscape of other smaller independent firms. And so, we've seen a number of these just in the last year, and if a number of them highlighted here. Predominantly, I think the goal or the effort here is for companies that are seeking really to get some sort of sense of scale, new capability, or perhaps even geography, typically with a big focus on new customer acquisition. I think the one aspect of all of this, one lesson I would argue through all this and watching this is I think the path to market is something that's often not considered and is often left far too late for startups to consider. It's very difficult to get to market, even if you have a really good mousetrap. And so some of these efforts are just that. It's basically accumulating acres or accumulating customers to allow for better market access. And, I'll just play hometown favorite for a minute here and just highlight Semios because they've done a very good job. Some of the participants in the earlier annual events here would note them, and they've been quite active in the last 9 months. 3 transactions, the biggest one being over $100 million here with Ag World just a couple of months ago. That transaction got them international exposure, and it also did expand their product set quite notably. Now, as I think I also mentioned, unicorn sightings are increasingly common here in the space. I think market valuations just in general, frankly, are way up, whether it's the public markets or the private markets. But when you get, the tsunami of capital flowing into any space, like I showed at the outset, valuations go up. And so here's just a sense for some of the players we track quite closely. Would note there that initially, I think these things tend to come in waves. Early on, it was biotech and CEA that captured a lot of the attention. The green here and the blue. We've seen a big surge of late, as I mentioned, in innovative food, which again is really that alternative protein and cellular ag having been really common of late. We've seen some big transactions in that space in the last little while. And then, of course, just as again as the natural byproduct of all this, we are seeing public market exits on the rise. And so this is just a handful of the transactions or the players that we watch now in the public markets quite closely. With a few more on the way here, would note via the SPAC route. The SPAC has been a very popular way of getting to market quickly in the last 10 to 15 months. Not all have been successful, I would note. There's been a couple that have actually failed and gone back to private market capital recently, but just making the point that a lot of these have been successful and we're seeing in the public markets. But just to close out, I would just say, I think a lot of times, entrepreneurs and people who have got ambition think the public market is the only route, but I just would caution you, pick your path wisely, make sure you're ready. I think readiness is something that people underestimate for the public markets. And this just demonstrates that there's been a pretty shaky start for a lot of companies out of the gate. It's not to suggest that they don't have good underlying technology or footings and they won't do well going forward. But as you can see here, the pattern has been more top down to the right as opposed to the other direction. I would point out one of the hometown favorites, again, that's done quite well has been Cubic Farms. That's one of the names we do cover in the public realm today here in Canada. So that's just a quick overview, Frank. I think I'm on my time, so I think I'll cut it off there. But if anyone's got any questions to follow up, wanted to look at the data in more detail or want to copy the deck, I'm happy to provide.
Thank you so much, Steve. Excellent. Great to see all this amazing progress in the sector. Okay, and that brings us to our first panel. but it looks like my screen is misbehaving. Here we go. So first panel, we'll discuss the importance of having a connected and collaborative agri-food tech community across Canada. On their journey from incubation to acceleration and scale up, companies need to find the right support for them as they validate their technology, refine their business model, find product market fit, and scale their business for a global market. Having a connected and collaborative agri-food community across Canada is key for success and the speed at which companies can scale. This panel is made up of people and organizations that help companies on this journey. Jason Bradley is the Manager of Strategic Partnerships at Old College. He will lead this panel with Kerry Wright, CEO of the Canadian Agri-Food Automation and Intelligence Network, Karra-Lee Gerrits, VP Strategy and Business Development at Protein Industries Canada, and Todd Ormann, Director Agriculture Solutions at Telus Business. Jason, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Frank. Thanks all for having this great event. It's a place I spend a lot of time in my everyday role at Olds College Smart Farm, seeing startups come in and doing applied research on the smart farm and working with some of our corporate strategics. So when I think about what we want to cover today, the question to me is, how do we create a more collaborative agri-food or ag tech innovation ecosystem, one that removes the silos that are there and one that's based on true co-opetition? That sounds like a academic kind of word, but it's a real thing. And it's something that I'm seeing more of. And we've got a group that can really, I think, help us to understand that. So how do we move from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset is where I think we need to really move to. So I want to start a little bit with the big picture around themes like having a collaborative agri-food ecosystem around foundational and applied research, that early to mid-stage investment and acceleration and commercialization of some of our companies. So in terms of that big picture, Todd, I'm just wondering, in what ways do you see the corporate strategics helping to grow, helping to support, helping to fund the development of the agri-food and ag tech ecosystem?
Well, I think, so I'm from the Telus standpoint, and I've spent the last 3.5 years with Telus Ag. So I was the first ag guy in Telus Ag. So some of those acquisitions that Steve showed up on the screen, I was a big part of those. From a Telus perspective, I think we see very much that the world is changing. The consumer is going to start looking at where their food comes from. We recognize there's a need for this connected ecosystem. That connected ecosystem will need to have a bit of a collaborative approach to it. So I think when you go down this path, and even in my past history, I at one point was a VP of product at Farmer's Edge. We did have a thought around that you were going to have this controlling world around data. I think when you start thinking about this world going forward, we are going to have to start thinking about the right regulatory environments and collaborative environments that we have to start thinking about how we move data back and forth. No one player is going to actually control the marketplace on data or on solutions. And thus we'll have to make sure that we have the right environment. And that in ag, I've always felt that there's a combination here of public policy and commercial sides that have to work together on this. So that collaboration between the public policy, institutions like Olds College and industry will probably drive that.
So thanks, and really it's been interesting to see how Telus has been helping that to occur since the advent of the move into agriculture. So moving on, Karra-Lee and Kerry, I'd like you to talk about R&D as it relates to startups and SMEs and M&Es that are innovating and developing technology. So Kerry, I'm going to start with you. Help us to understand how important it is for players, so for the startups, for those SMEs, those M&Es, and those post-secondaries, to be completely collaborative on their projects, even before they start to look for funding from organizations like yours.
Yes, thanks, Jason. And, really, I guess the N in CAIN, Canadian Agri-Food Automation and Intelligence Network, you're probably glad we call it CAIN, is really about that network ability. And our funding platform through Innovation Science Economic Development, we were awarded 49.5 million to help really move forward the Agtech platform. And really we think of it as a hand up. And within that, where we're oriented is that we require 2 SMEs to be involved in our project. So for me, what I really like about this platform is it really builds in the relevance of, it's just not the research sitting on a shelf, it's actually taking it and SMEs identifying that it's important to them and relevant to them to move forward. Now, in terms of that networking, we do really encourage academia, other researchers, other professionals be a part of their team. So we do hope they think about it, Jason, before they head our way, but that's also part of the piece that Kane can play and the other networks, as Karra-Lee I'm sure will mention, is that we're able to, through our network, also help to build those robust teams. And we're finding that those collaborations are really setting the stage for success later on down the road. So as they collaborate and discuss among themselves and create their projects, it not only helps the project at that time, but also its success going forward.
So I know I'm supposed to be moderating, not commenting, but I'll just throw in that from the privilege point I've had on the Smart Farm as it started, back in 2017, the collaborations that are already established before some of those groups, those partner groups have come to the Smart Farm, they're the ones that seem to get their problem statement best identified. They access funding, non-dilutive funding, sort of the fastest and the most efficiently. Their projects get implemented on the Smart Farm really well. So there's an affirmation of that I see in time.
Yeah.
So Karra-Lee, from your perspective at Protein Industries Canada, what are some of these folks missing, and what should they be focusing on? Like, what are you seeing in the real world as they're coming to you for looking for these types of funding within the ecosystem? What are they missing? What should they be focusing on?
Well, I'd say, similar to Kerry, we have rules that are within our funding program that require collaboration. And there's a requirement that one of the companies be a Canadian SME. And I think just the fact that we have a program that incents some conversations that might not otherwise take place encourages groups to think about, well, how could we work together and how could we come together, and what's the win-win benefit in what might look like from the outside a bit of a David and Goliath relationship in some cases. And it really helps encourage these groups to sit down and look at, well, how can this creation of this feedback loop be something productive that's good for the industry. And I think, in terms of what's missing, we always have groups come to us and ask and say, well, how long does the application process take? How long does it take to get my project approved? And our answer is quite simple. It's as long as it takes you to get together with your partners and figure out how you want to do this. Like, we go as fast as you go. And so the big stumbling block a lot of the times has to do with IP. And so we're seeing a big challenge around IP literacy. So groups not necessarily being on an equal footing in terms of their understanding of what they should be doing or could be doing to best protect their IP and best leverage their IP. So we do have a function within PIC that provides some advice on that and are looking to help build out that capacity. The other piece, and this isn't going to be a surprise, is sometimes access to financing. So our program works, we aren't able to provide funding up front. We reimburse costs that have already been incurred by the groups. And so the groups have to have the funding in place in order to participate in our program. And that's sometimes a piece that's missing that they're not aware of.
So maybe just a quick question to our 3 panelists. So IP literacy, I think that's a great one. Where else can an early stage startup or even a scale up that's maybe struggling with that, where else can they find that help? What have you experienced? Where can you point them to? Any thoughts there?
I think that through the ones that we've experienced, and Kate is in its early days, I'll just mention, has really been around our knowledge of the space and the ag tech space, if you will. So it's understanding kind of what's going on in the research area, what's going on by different service providers, and just having that insight, that connectivity to be able to say, like, we're not going to say, you need to connect with this person or that, but we can also make suggestions of what would help build out those teams. So I think really, Jason, I think it's having that well-rounded, but also those industry experts, being able to tap into those people that really understand the space.
Okay. Thanks. And I from other personal experience, there's quite a few law firms that are realizing this is an opportunity for them to help early stage companies, and sometimes it's not pro bono, but it's close to, because they realize that that's a need for those companies, so that when they become more successful and they're further down, they can for more of a reasonable commercial fee provide that service. So I know I've seen that as well for early stage startups, is to access some of those firms, and some of which might be involved in the call here. So I've heard over the last number of years, Agri-Food, Agtech. I think I heard today Agri-Food tech. What is that? There's this long supply chain that whoever we is, we think we know, from the upstream sort of, early stage inputs to the producer to the downstream. But I'm gonna throw it to Todd and ask, ag tech is a broad term and it can mean different things to different people. I'm interested to hear what you define from your position as ag tech.
Yeah, so I'm with you, Jason. I think ag tech is a big word, right? And I know when we started thinking of our use cases, and again, on Steve's graphics, pretty interesting. You see a whole bunch of boxes there, right? We started thinking about various use cases, and recognize that you had to think through your use case, and that instead of thinking something that's going to cross the entire market. So initially we broke things down between farm and ranch, agribusiness, and agri-food. And then I think you also have to start thinking even on that level by commodity and by regions of how you're going to apply that. And that's the thing too. I think everyone's kind of looking for that great, big, huge, massive play like a Facebook or the next, thing that's just going to take off everything. That's not the case. You really have to know your space. And usually it's not the technology that we find is the issue. There's a lot of cool tech out there. It's a lot more about your go-to-market and really understanding how you get there. And that, I think, is where we always miss. So it is understanding your space. It is understanding that you do have to think about how you grow globally, but execute locally, and then also execute within your category. So dairy does not work like beef, nor does corn and beans always work like almonds. And if you don't know that, and you don't know how you're going to approach that, you're probably going to fail. So that knowledge and understanding where you're going to play in that value chain, do it. Now, Telus is going to try to connect that in that chain from farm to fork, but even there, we are looking at specific use cases to basically drive that over time to connect that like we did in the Telus health side.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. And Frank, I'm just going to do a quick time check because I know we have another panel coming. So where are we at for time? Because I'm just want to be mindful of that for this section.
You've got till 3:40.
Okay.
13 minutes, yeah.
Okay, I want to unpack a little bit what you said, Todd, about, and I see a lot of, and maybe because of where I'm at on the smart farm, I see the companies working a lot at their product development. But you talked about working on developing their go-to-market strategy and understanding the product market fit. So what else can you share with the audience around, like, how much more or what type of effort should those companies be putting into that effort, the developing their go-to-market strategy and product market fit?
Well, simply, how are you going to actually, like, again, looking at every section a little bit different, but there are some generalities as well. I mean, a lot of farmers look like me. They're a 50-year-old guy. They're somewhat conservative. They got big fat thumbs. They aren't going to act like a 14 or 15-year-old. And so how are you going to interact and train and develop them? Almost every piece of research that I look at and see today is that the farm feels like it's being overwhelmed with technology, but it does not have the actual support. I find those that are winning really have recognized how they support the farm in their sector. Semios, again, that was brought up, I think has done a really good job of picking up that high value farm and then recognizing how they service and support it. It isn't just a technology thing. It's that support and service that goes around it as well. And recognizing your sector, recognizing where you're going to play, I think is what drives that success. So that to me is where the go-to-market is. Just don't think about product. Think about the other 4 or 5 P's as well. And then recognize there's going to be some nuances both locally and by commodity.
So that leads me to think about a lot of the audience here. So another part of this, so product development, go to market? What about go to finance strategy? So a lot of we have a great success story of one of our students, young student, who we think has $100 million opportunity in front of him, but he had to learn the whole funding and go to finance strategy on his own. So a question maybe to any of the three of our panelists, like, where else do you see those startups go to get that help with developing a go to finance strategy? Have you seen any of that in your experience, and do any of your programs address that? That's a big question.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the particular space that we're operating in, and we talked a little bit about silos here, and
yeah,
the food companies, there's actually a well-developed market, and there's a lot of appetite for VC from that. But the ingredient processing space, and I know I'm moving a little bit away from the tech space. Tech, there's a well-developed market for as well. So if you learn how to speak that language and learn how to present things properly, there's an opportunity there. We have a little bit of a different flavor because there's this ingredient processing space that's neither equity nor venture. It kind of sits in this middle gray that there isn't an emerging investor yet. So we're kind of looking at how do we work it from both ends, and that's kind of where we've put our focus. And where there are well-established finance markets, or that's our assessment, we've really been referring companies to other platforms that can help support that. So there's well-developed incubator programs, accelerator programs that focus on that. And we'll sometimes partner with them and collaborate with them, but sometimes we'll just make referrals as well. I don't know, Kerry, what your experience has been.
Well, and I think, I know, Karra-Lee, you've got a deep history in the whole business development side, and that's the space I've worked in Agri-Food. And, really, I would say it is, as Todd said, it's focusing on all those P's and really understanding your lane, if you will, and the market opportunities. You kind of have to, in my mind, kind of take it down and then funnel it into what you can approach and take off. I think the steps will be incremental. So I think really being able to focus in and really understanding what those opportunities are, and then identify like-minded people for those financing opportunities.
I think one of the other things we talked about too was tracing it all the way back from the consumer plate. So, there's technologies that are really focused on the food, the product development, product formulation. And then there's other technologies that are more perhaps focused midstream. Well, how do you connect all of those all the way along to make, to see that the data is being collected and accumulated to meet the consumer demands that were referenced earlier this afternoon, but in such a way that also consumers are paying for it. And you're seeing those revenues roll back all the way through the value chain to the production level and at various steps all the way through. And that's a little bit of a, that's, I think, an evolution that's in process, but still needs some nudging and needs some work.
So Karra-Lee, you talked about some of the solutions and customer focused, and I want to pick up on that thought. And it just a bit of a preamble here with regards to that. I was listening to the Agtech So What podcast the other day, and Pete Nelson from Ag Launch and Walt Duflucht from Western Growers were talking about the mistakes that many startup founders make when they're meeting with farmers for the first time. And you talked about customers, and farmers are for many of the ag tech, whatever we define that as, are customers. So they talked about partnering and being very deliberate to engage with farmers as business partners, not retail customers. So we talked about this supply chain back and forth, and I'm really curious to hear from any of our panelists. What do you think about that? And sort of to your point, Todd, you talked about think global but act local. So how often do our startups make the mistake of trying to go right to the sale to the customer without partnering with the farmer with their solution? What's some of your experience in that? Todd.
Well, so just maybe so again, I think farmers are somewhat relatively conservative.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of things that hit the farm before ag tech honestly are very polished. Like it takes about 15 to 20 years to get an AI, an active ingredient, off the ground. It's similar when you start looking at seed varieties. So by the time the farmer usually gets technology, it is cooked, for various regulatory reasons. Technology tends to work on agile development. That is not a normal way to do it, right? So there again is a bit of an education to show the farmer that what you're getting, quite honestly, is an early version, and that is going to change over time. That way of working is not well established, honestly, in agriculture. But that, again, is how technology is traditionally launched. And again, it shows you that we probably haven't done enough education with the farming community. And again, I'm talking about primary production, not necessarily on the food side, right? Where that needs to be probably worked on a little bit better. And so that's, you know, so to your point, sometimes I think we forget what culture we are in. Like, you know, you see that technology culture coming in from a Silicon Valley and trying to apply itself in a conservative agriculture environment that does not always work. And again, this is where I think we miss. And we're getting better, but it's taking some time. I don't know if I answered your question, Jason, but it is a bit of work.
Yeah, and
Go
I
ahead,
think
Kerry.
too, Jason, I think Jason, and you've talked to it already. And you know, part of Kane's platform is you know, we talk about ag tech, robotics, automation, data-driven decision making, and smart farms. And you know, we're so proud to be part of, you know, really establishing a pan-Canada smart farm platform. And for me, it's that ability to, if you will, like Todd mentioned, like almost be a pilot, demonstrate, actually show the farmers on the ground, boots on the ground, how this would work, how it would apply, what's the ROI, what would this look like? Even if it is a little bit iterative in process yet, it will give that ability to show them, demonstrate it, validate it, and also to have that opportunity for education, no matter what their age is. You know, the new farmers and the ones that are here and looking forward to the future. So I think that in itself, I think is a really powerful platform to be able to springboard projects.
And I guess what I hear us saying, and what I've seen and heard, is that like the startup world and investment, we get pretty used to like doing things at light speed and want, you know, quick turns and quick wins, which is important. But to Todd's point, like agriculture is a different culture. Kim McConnell reminded me the other day, it's one of the only industries that has culture in its name.
Yeah.
So that means that it takes sometimes a lot more time and effort to build relationships. And it sounds hokey, but sometimes you have to just approach folks like a neighbor, and that takes time to build a relationship. So I want to then expand on that and make a little bit of a statement and to get you to respond to it around the ecosystem and what you need to do around developing that. I've had this privilege to be involved in the ag innovation ecosystem since 2017, since it sort of first started. Some of the work I did at the outset, it was more of an organic growth, I would say, but it's becoming much more purposeful and directed. And maybe this is a bit of a message to our investor friends that are listening in. I'd actually put forward that it's actually somewhat more mature in many ways than it was even just a few years ago. And I say that because I see new types of investment coming in, new accelerators coming in. And so that tells me that there's something maturing there. And even through my work at Olds College Smart Farm, I see a lot of new and recent startups developing and validating their tech within the smart ag ecosystem. So it's maturing, and that's a good thing. But one thing I hear continually in my work as a co-founder in the Agri-Food Impact, which is a social enterprise ecosystem booster within agriculture, is that there isn't enough of a connection in the ecosystem. There isn't ways for startups and investors and large organizations to connect really well. And having something even like a digital wayfinder tool would be an important way to grow our ecosystem beyond where it's at. So Karra-Lee, like, do you agree with that? Do you see that the need to grow the ecosystem could be enhanced by having more of an ecosystem connector and more of a digital platform to help that connection happen?
Well, in theory, I think it could, but
Yeah.
I think you said it, there's culture involved. And the cultural element to it is people want a warm introduction. People are still human. And I think what we're finding, our experience in PIC, is that, you know, you can build a tool, and yes, people will use it to do their research, and they'll do it to, you know, get information on somebody. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that replaces word of mouth or a warm introduction. So I think, you know, the value of the ecosystems is actually in people getting to know each other and being generous with their time and generous with their introductions and helping do their bit to grow connections for others. And that's where we're seeing, as ecosystems mature, that happens more readily. And I think, after 3.5, 4 years, PIC is getting to that point where we're seeing that happen more and more. So that would be my perspective.
Yeah,
I don't know
I
that.
think,
Carrie, go,
Yeah.
because I was going to throw to you because you've been across the country and now you're in a different spot. So what does that mean to you?
well, I absolutely, and I've been in the across the agri-food space as well, and spent a lot of time in communications and marketing, frankly. And at the end of the day, Karra-Lee, I absolutely agree. It's about connecting. It's about, I'm old school. So, telling stories, explaining to people about your project through a story is very impactful. And I think it feeds itself to this kind of relationship. So when, the N in Kane is network, and I really look at, what is that? I think there's a gap there too as well, Jason, when you talk about that connectivity through, the researchers are out there researching, and then there's issues and things going on the farm, and without understanding the business of farming, that's very difficult for them to kind of make that. But I think by explaining, and as Karra said, being generous with just openness to be able to explore and explain what you're doing, and then have through that connectivity. So I think that'll play a big role in the opportunities, and that's what we want to encourage, is to bring those groups together that don't normally talk to each other, and then be able to have the ability, a platform, if they will, the glue to be able to bring them together and say, hey, this is something here that we could work on, and hey, we've got some funds that you can apply to.
Well, I think we're up against time, and we could probably have a coffee or a soft drink or something interesting more to drink and spend the rest of the afternoon. But I think I'll just close it on the idea of how do we work together to move from that scarcity mindset where there's a feeling like there's maybe not enough startups, or there's not enough investment, or there's not enough opportunity. How do we move that to an abundance mindset? And I'll leave us with that challenge, and I'll turn it back to Frank and the team for the rest of the.
Thank you so much for this amazing discussion. It really unpacked a lot, and I'm glad that we have this recorded, because I know there's lots more people that aren't on the call today that can take a lot of this wisdom home and apply it. So thank you very much for sharing your grassroots knowledge.
Thank you so much.
So that gets us to our last panel. That is headed up again by Steve Hansen. He is going to lead a panel discussion about raising funding from startup to scale up, and what has to change in that job to be done from startup to scale up. CEOs and co-founders Eric and Otam, Michael Riedeck, and Samuel Fournier have graciously agreed to share their experiences and advice in this space. And I really look forward to learning from them and sharing that with the rest of our community.
Thanks, Frank. I appreciate it. And good afternoon again, everyone. The focus of this panel is fundraising, as Frank suggested, and it is, of course, a critical part of any startup's journey along the way. It's also one that's often fraught with confusion, misunderstanding, and just a number of speed bumps, I think, along the way, particularly as companies begin to scale from beyond, friends and family money to something more significant over time. So I am very pleased to have 3 CEOs to chat about this topic here today with us, as Frank suggested. Again, Eric from This Fish, Michael, Lucid Biosciences, and Sam from Chrysler Labs. I think the goal really ultimately here, before I get into the questions, is first to understand where each of these companies is at in their process and their fundraising efforts, and then ultimately to drill down into some of the key learnings that I think they've perhaps accumulated in their journeys that might be of use to some of the other younger companies on the line here today. So, gentlemen, thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it with me. I'll get right into it. Just in terms of setting the stage for our audience here. I'll first ask each of you just to tell us, first what round you're currently raising, where you're at in that process, and ultimately what key milestones you're looking to achieve with the new funds. Eric, I'll start with you.
Great. Well, thanks. Well, I'm pitching today, so I don't want to steal my own thunder. Yeah, so we're sort of on a seed 2, because we did a very small seed round a couple of years ago. And for us, we're in a really scaling mode, moving into some new markets that may be a bit capital intensive to get into initially, but will pay off in the long term. And then also a little bit on our product roadmap as well. We need to do a little bit of investment in our product roadmap, particularly around artificial intelligence, which I know is pretty hot amongst investors right now. So yeah, we're looking to raise basically a C2.
That's helpful. Michael, do you want to go next?
Yes, we actually just last month closed a $4 million round from
Congratulations.
A lot of Vancouver investors, several who are on the call here as well, eFund and Woodif Capital and Women's Equity. What is it? Sorry, I'm just confused about the name here now, but Women's Equity Lab, right? Yeah. And we were able to bring in 2 VCs as well with the Agtech focus, who also want to participate in our next round, which is the Series A. So we just wrapped this up. The next step now, later this month, is actually to start the $10 million Series A round, where we're more specifically looking to focus on institutional investors. That round will be all about commercialization and manufacturing scale up. So that's where we're today.
It's very topical. Congratulations on that. That's great. And Sam, how about yourselves?
Yeah, sure. So a little background. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of CRISPR. So we have built a real-time cell analysis solution for precision ag. So basically, it's a lab in the field. So I have a probe here. So it's basically just that we are bringing directly in the field. So we're based in Montreal. We're a staff of around 23 folks now. We've just initiated the process for Series A. So it's ongoing as of now. We're looking for 5 to 7 million Canadian. We have launched our product commercially this season with beta season done in 2020 with very good success. So 2021 were our first commercial season. We have clients in 7 provinces in Canada and around 20 states in the US. So with the raise, our goal is really to scale our solution across North America, but with existing clients, but also with new clients, and ready to explore new opportunities specific to carbon quantification and region agriculture.
Okay, great. So we've got, again, 3 companies here that have all really started to make that journey towards the scale. Michael, certainly, again, congratulations on your latest round. I'm going to get into some of the key learnings now as you've sort of bridged from your past round to the current round. I think that's often confusing sometimes for people in terms of, do you do the same thing or what do you do differently? And so, what are the 1 or 2 key learnings from your last fundraising round that helped you prepare for, or perhaps even change your approach as you launched into this latest round? Did you prepare differently? Did you reach out to a different set of investors, broader set of investors? What were those key learnings that you might be able to share with us that you're applying to your current process? I'll start with you, Eric.
Yeah, so I think for us, our first round was more or less a Canadian round. We did participate in Techstars sustainability, so they were in that round. And going through Techstars, now looking at this round and going to the US, the one thing that strikes me is the massive difference in valuations in Vancouver, Toronto, and the market. So I find that particularly difficult in early discussions with investors in Vancouver or the United States. It's people ask you, well, what are you putting your valuation at? And it's tough when you're trying to bridge both those markets and raise money in both those markets. So I've come to realize that it's really about just kind of landing that first lead investor who sets kind of the tone for the investment round. Vancouver investors don't like high valuations, but I think if they saw a reputable fund in the United States, accepting a larger valuation and starting off the round, they'll accept it. So I think that was probably one of the biggest learnings for me in the round that I'm currently doing.
No, that's great. That's good perspective. And having that anchor investor will ultimately dictate terms, which is important. And I would concur that valuations can be dramatically different depending on region, and particularly with your case where you've got a fairly niche advanced product. Michael, how about yourselves? You've just come off the back of a $4 million raise. How did you go about that round being any different than the prior?
Yeah, we started the round off actually with a strong focus on local angel investors here in the region, and local is Seattle as well, Seattle and Vancouver. And then when the round progressed, we got more traction also with some groups, angel groups, and eventually with a series of VCs. So a lot of personal networking. What I found really useful, if I would do it again, I probably would, start faster with meeting and presenting at several angel groups than what I've done before. The other thing that I found extremely useful, we went through 4 different AgTech focused incubators in a year time. So it's a lot of work, but a great place to connect with people that are focused on the area where you're hoping to grow. So there was a bit of an overlap in sort of what they offer in terms of programs, but I mean, we were there really for the networking and the people. So I think that was super useful. If I look at the Series A, what we've done now is we have created a long list of impact investors and VCs that we believe are strongly aligned with our vision. And so really narrowed it down, had initial conversations with a whole bunch of them to find out if our business aligns with their thesis, and keeping them updated now over time to start building that relationship. Just sending a presentation, a deck, and a one-time pitch is really not enough. It all requires relationship building. And so we're taking like half a year to 9 months for that process now.
If I may, can I just, your discussion around some of the VCs and the institutional investors is notable here. What, from your perspective, how different has that been? Like, how much more in depth has the diligence been? What do you need to do differently to approach them? Do you wish you would have gone sooner or later? Just maybe describe that process quickly for us.
Well, I think what you really quickly can, I don't know if the word is right, but like waste your time on is, reaching out to the wrong investor type, right? Or the wrong, doing pitches and meeting with people and spending hours to find out it doesn't even align with their focus. And so getting that really clear is, is saving you a lot of time. I guess that's where I would start. What I also notice is that sort of the focus on milestones really shifts. In the earlier rounds, it's all about showing progress towards a larger goal. When you get into, at least for us in this Series A round, it's all about commercialization and go to market. That is the one big thing, is showing traction, showing that we're able to put this in the hands of farmers, and showing that farmers like this product. I mean, that seems to be the whole focus of everybody we're talking with. It's like, what are the results of the trials? How many people have used it? And in the previous rounds, it was more like, are you able to show progress with your R&D and your product development and so forth? So it's a shift in milestones, and also how you communicate around those milestones.
That's great. And I think I would reiterate that point. In my experience thus far, mapping out your milestones and describing how you've been able to meet those milestones, against them or not, is an important process to have mapped out so investors can understand your progress. What about you, Sam? How has your process gone from your perspective?
Yeah, so we are doing things very differently than what we've done in a seed round. So I have to agree with Eric and Mike on that point. So first learning for us is that it's not every investors that are made equal. So meaning that you need to do your own work before talking to investors. So some currently have money, some don't. Some are only scouting for technologies. Some are more serious in their process. And so we see some more professional investors as opposed to some people that are kind of starting in the business. Second learning for us is that time is valuable. So moment we spend on looking for money is not moment that we have to scale our business. So the process should be based on science and not on guesswork, right? So that was kind of one of the main learning we had. So we are planning to raise in advance. We execute the plan, and hopefully we harvest a lot of farm sheets. So this is the only way to drive valuation as a Canadian company. And the last learning is investment is a game of relationship, right? So we are fortunate enough to be introduced to different investors during our seed round, but we needed to maintain these relationships along the way. So the way we've decided to do is to build a monthly newsletter where we were sending our KPIs, some market insights as well, So just to keep those people involved and engaged. So of course, our pitch evolved a lot during that process and the preparation too. So to be quite frank, I just think we know a bit more what we're doing now than what we've done during the first raise. So, and you've mentioned, do we target the exact same VCs? For us, not exactly. We saw a big difference between VC investing in innovation at large, as opposed as VC investing in ag technology. So we need to have people that understand those trends, understand the time to market of these new technologies, and we really need to kind of better understand their thesis of investment to be aligned with their vision. So this is one of the big thing we're currently doing.
No, that's very helpful, and I think your time comment is well taken. I think investors, or sorry, I think startup founders often underestimate how long it can take to go through the fundraising process.
Yeah.
So start early, be prepared, be meticulous in your documentation, and plan for more than you think you're going to need, because it's going to take you longer, and you don't want to run out of money, of course. Just as maybe we've got a few more minutes, but I wanted to touch on just the idea of non-dilutive capital for a moment for you guys. What has been your approach there? How aggressively have you gone after that non-dilutive capital? We've had a couple of presenters on here earlier today that help provide that capital, but you maybe just describe to us quickly what you've done thus far, and if there's any key programs that you would recommend as must-dos or must programs to pursue for earlier stage startups. Eric?
Yeah, so in the last year, we've been pretty lucky. We landed some fairly large non-dilutive grants that were pretty competitive. So I think only about maybe 10% of the applicants actually got awarded. So we got $500,000 Canada Ocean Supercluster Award. We won one of the BC Aquaculture Innovation Awards. We also were one of the companies that got the BC Agritech Award. So we've been pretty lucky on these larger awards. But these are kind of, I would say, more one-offs. And then, we typically go for can export because we're mostly selling into foreign markets. So that's been a big help. Digital Skills for Youth, which is a federal program, but delivered through a lot of nonprofits. That's actually great. It provides up to $25,000 for 6 months internships. And we've onboarded a lot of new junior employees with that. And then we actually haven't gotten a lot of IRAP over the years, just because we've been successful with these other grant fundings. But, we're in constant contact with our IRAP rep, and we're currently in an IRAP program right now. So
that's great. And are you managing that all internally, Eric? Or are you getting help from external parties? It is a complicated web sometimes.
Yeah, it is. I spent 10 years in the nonprofit sector, so I know how to write a funding application.
Okay,
So that's been part of my success.
Okay, good perspective. And how about you, Michael? Would non-dilutive capital been an important part of your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges from an investment point of view that we have in Agtech is that a lot of the work is CapEx intensive, right? Whether you're in robotics or, like in our case, like in fertilizer, it's about machines and processes and optimization, and the Canadian Agtech programs, because there's many, have been extremely helpful for us getting through that process to scale up, basically from like lab bench scale to industrial scale. So we received grants from the BC Agritech, BC Innovate, NRC, and obviously the biggest one for us was Protein Industries Canada, which really allowed us to accelerate that scale up. So it has been, I don't even know if we would have been able to get this far without those grants. I mean, that's how important they were in our whole process and growth. We decided earlier this year to hire a part-time, 3 days a week grant writer to help us, get the documentation properly in order and so forth. And that seems to have paid off really well. We've been applying to not only these types of grants, but also prizes and other, challenges that are, all around the globe. And, we just participated in a program in Singapore, for instance, giving us some perspective in the Asian markets. But yeah, I mean, there is so many grant opportunities, and it's super critical for Agtech companies to get through that early stage. And yeah, I would advise everybody to jump in there and don't be afraid for the paperwork, because it's really going to pay off.
Well worth it, sounds like. And how about you, Sam? On you're out east, but are you gone after many of the same programs, or what's been your approach?
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing as the other founders, right? We are a major fan of non-dilutive money, and the real question should be, why wouldn't we going after these money, right? It's a real opportunity for startup to extend the runway and to solve more problem with less, with less solution. So investors are also very happy because it affects the leverage that serve well in terms of valuation. So in the last 2 years, we were able to gather, I would say, around 3 million non-dilutive. So, for us, that was a real game changer. So, of course, we don't have exactly the same access because we're based in Montreal, so we don't have access to the same provincial grants. But we have a lot of different programs here in Quebec that are pretty generous. But in terms of the federal standpoint, one that was probably one of the best we've been through was SDTC. So if you're a clean tech company, you're able to apply to SDTC. So there's a lot of fun there. Otherwise, we've been participating to IRAP, which was also mentioned. So federal standpoint, those are kind of the major two. We've been in discussion with PIC as well. Timeframe was not specifically good for us now, but yeah, I think this is a big source of money as well.
That's great. And I would just note, even from an external standpoint or lens, a lot of these grants come with diligence processes that also can be perceived valuable to new investors that come along late thereafter. So it does provide an element of credibility later as well, having had some of these groups back you. So, okay, look, I'm on the hour here and on the time, so I'm gonna just cut it off there and say thank you to all three of you. I think the journeys have been great, and you've demonstrated some great success. And I think there's a lot of learnings that can be had for younger organizations that are just getting started and following in your footsteps. So again, thank you all, and I'll turn it back to you, Frank.
Thanks so much, Steve and Eric, Michael, and Sam. Amazing sharing there. Wendy, can you please put up the last poll, and then let's hand things over to Telso for the second part of our meeting.